A few months ago, I got into Warhammer the Old World in a big way. While I've loved the standard experience, I found the more narrative elements to be really lacking. I experienced something similar in 40k, but I don't know, I thought it would be a little bit different here. On the 40k side of things, I've played in multiple Crusade leagues, both with my friends and at local game stores throughout the past 2 editions. While I like them in theory, I feel like that format of games is way too crunchy for brand new people, and they relied way too heavily on having to read between the lines and try and make that story yourself. This might just be a more of a general culture of play thing, but those games would often end up in the power gamers of the group monopolizing the resources, monopolizing the wins and upgrades, while weaker players were often punished with wounds and fewer resources. My best experiences with Crusade were in 9th edition, where we had small groups who all had an interest in forming a narrative, because unless you have that, 1 or 2 players really can't push a narrative. Even like a GM really will need some player involvement if you expect to have any sort of real story progression. So with that said, I have begun prepping a campaign that takes some of those RPG elements that have always existed in wargaming and brings them back to the fore. There are some highlights from a demo game at the very end where I introduce a brand new player to Old World. Feel free to skip ahead of that, but before we do, I want to talk about the underlying game design philosophy and how I wanted this campaign to work. When it came to writing up this kind of campaign, there were 3 central areas where I wanted to pivot away from the traditional Warhammer Fantasy formula. Firstly, I wanted to approach these games from the point of view of a game master, like you would have in an RPG. Secondly, I want to find a balance of having a progressive, persistent force, while also not having a single unlucky route lead to a unit getting completely cut down for the rest of the campaign. Finally, I wanted to break up the usual monotony of standard missions. I wanted the chance to have more asymmetrical engagements, which would hopefully give the full-on pitch battles more scope and context when they do happen. It is totally possible to play intricate narrative games with a number of players who are still in competition. Obviously, this would require a much different outlook than a proper competitive or tournament setting. Still, my conception of this game really required that I fully step into the role of a game master and completely abandon trying to be competitive with my players. And just a small aside regarding that, I originally thought that this style of game would lend itself really well to bringing in a group of people who are of mixed wargaming familiarity. I thought that giving each player a unit or 2 and expanding the scope over a number of games could hopefully help with onboarding. While I still think this is probably one of the strongest ways to pursue this format, I really quickly started having the classic issue of scheduling and commitment issues, particularly with those who had no wargame experience and did not want to commit to a multi-session long campaign. I'll be revisiting that application, but for this test game, I instead picked out a single player with sort of medium to low wargaming experience and with a greater focus on personal expression and aesthetics rather than the mechanical nuance of games he plays. To get back to the main point, even though I was technically his opponent, every step of design and play was informed by the fact that while I was attempting to challenge my player, I didn't necessarily want to best him in a way that was narratively unsatisfying or that he would be unable to engage with. I gave myself a lot of leeway to design in ways that would be quote-unquote unfair. However, I never leveraged that privilege in a way that distorted the game. One example of this is hidden information. I would often put him in situations where there are additional objectives, enemies, or events that are not revealed at the outset of the mission. This also includes magic items, which will usually be included visually when I try to describe the adversary, but I probably won't go, hey, those magic dual axes are the axes of Korgor. They have these stats, they give him +1 strength, -2 AP. I sort of make him figure that out on his own, and maybe over a couple games, If he sees the same item a couple of times, he might realize, or he might face the same adversary multiple times, as a sort of nemesis type character who might keep coming back, in which case you'll obviously get to learn their specific items, abilities, and traits. The DM-player relationship continues between the actual games. So for this campaign, we're utilizing an actual map of Middenland, and I'll usually give the player a few choices on what his approach will be and what he wants to do. Those choices are what dictate the next mission, what his objectives are going to be, and what threats he'll face. I also don't want to make it seem like defeat should be an impossibility. I will usually not try to force losses. Or if the narrative dictates that a player is horrendously outnumbered, then instead the mission might focus on mitigating losses, choosing who to sacrifice and who to save, and formulating an organized retreat. I also want the player to have the option to withdraw his forces if he is in a bad situation. I still think losses should be in the minority. I would say maybe between 15-25%, although this is something I'll try and figure out on my own as we play. While this might be low stakes, I'm hoping that the risk of attrition in this persistent force will be enough to raise those stakes and make those losses really feel impactful. The second pillar of the campaign is a persistent force. Like most Crusade or Slow Grow campaigns, a force is gradually built up across the many games. Unlike those, however, we do not use a strict points limit. Instead, forces are gradually added, many times being a reward for dangerous side objectives, promoting a risk versus reward style of play. While I was writing up these rules, I often found myself thinking back to my favorite games of all time. Homeworld sees you control a fleet during their hard-fought exodus to an ancestral homeland. While it has standard RTS resource gathering and army building, you still have a fleet that persists throughout the game. Additionally, you have the chance to salvage enemy ships or otherwise gain additional ships through missions that add onto your fleet and visually tell you the story of your campaign. While this doesn't translate one-to-one into a Warhammer game, I want to do something similar. Just past the halfway mark in Homeworld, there is a mission where you are forced to face off against a strange anomaly. You complete the mission without destroying other vessels in the radius of the ghost ship. The mission allows you to take control of the other ships also left in orbit. It results in you getting one of the enemy ships with a really striking yellow and red color scheme. It's one of my favorite ship designs in the franchise, and now whenever I look at my fleet, I know exactly where I got it. That's sort of how I wanted every new unit to feel. Outside of just being able to name and upgrade them, you tie them into a scenario and a place. So it's a small spoiler for the actual battle report, but it sees the main force saving a village. When the local village men return, they offer to fight alongside the main force. It hopefully humanizes and grounds that unit and makes them feel like something beyond just a disposable unit of Imperial archers. The starting force was decided by choosing a protagonist and a few supporting units. The idea is that the protagonist begins as a low-level hero character and will get the chance to upgrade to a lord rank, find magic items, and acquire mounts. Likewise, the same progression applies to the other troops through a new system called Glory. Glory effectively functions like a kind of experience point. The MVP of each match will get a point of glory. Additionally, many missions will have secret secondary objectives that, if accomplished, will grant the unit additional glory. For example, I might designate certain units like the enemy general, a big monster, or a powerful elite unit that grant glory if defeated. Glory can be spent on a number of upgrades, such as adding command models, reinforcing a unit with more models. With multiple glory points, a unit can be ranked up to the next tier. For example, a low-level character can become their lord equivalent. A unit of basic Imperial State troops can become veteran state troops. Likewise, those same veterans could eventually rank up to be either great swords or to the Guard. When it came to units destroyed during games, I didn't want to do a system of stacking debuffs like wounds in 40k Crusade. Instead, I opted to have the risk to outright lose a unit. I felt this offered more weight and narrative depth to each battle. There is a special roll a destroyed unit needs to make called a reinforcement check. It starts out as a 1+, or effectively an auto pass, but for example, a unit destroyed early in the campaign might go from a 1+ to a 2+. So if it's destroyed again, it then has the risk of not being reinforced, and every time it gets destroyed another time, it gets harder and harder to reinforce that unit. Eventually, a unit may become too depleted to realistically rebuild and just removed from the campaign. Even partial losses matter. If a unit drops below 25% strength, its reinforcement rating worsens, even if it survives the battle. This sort of represents the gradual loss of experienced soldiers. Early casualties can be replaced, but repeated losses erode the core of the regiment until it's no longer the same force. This also creates meaningful decisions about withdrawal. Sometimes the best outcome is not to win, but extract the damage units before they are lost entirely. The final design pillar was trying to capitalize on asymmetry in mission design. While there are some fun narrative scenarios in the official Old World books, I really wanted to test the system to its first extents and warp the core game to best fit the scenarios I had in mind. Since the player was starting off with a force of only about 200 points, I wanted to give him some additional agency to pick his engagements and play smart until he builds up a larger force. For this, I introduced an XCOM, there's a few mods, just ignore that. Anyway, I introduced an XCOM 2-esque concealment system where all the player's units start concealed in certain missions. The way this works is that in your movement phase, you roll a pool of d6s based on the actions you take. A regular move is 1d6, a march is 2d6. Certain unit attributes also affect this. So cavalry, add an extra d6, being in skirmish formation subtracts 1. You total that pool, roll them together, total the results of the dice, and that many inches is the detection radius. If there's any enemies within that radius, that unit is now detected. Outside of the obvious bonuses from an enemy not knowing where you are and not being able to target you or potentially not being able to face you, allowing you to get more easy charges to the flanks and the back, I also gave some extra bonuses. So shooting or charging automatically breaks concealment in exchange for a bonus. For shooting, you get a stack +1 to hit on the attack. Although, if you take a big risk and charge out of concealment, not only does the enemy get no charge reactions, the unit that charge gets the fight's first special rule. This is somewhat unlikely to happen, but it gives the player a nice bonus for accomplishing a difficult maneuver. On the other hand, since the main antagonists are beastmen, they also will take advantage of stealth and ambushing. Their system is somewhat similar, but theirs is more based on line of sight, where if one of the player's units is within a certain range, they'll be able to see it. However, beastmen will obviously typically hide in the forest, in which case you need to be within 12 inches to actually see into the forest and be able to detect hidden enemies there. I can see this system being pivotal for early missions, yet it will probably be phased out as the battles get bigger, although I'm sure I'll be creating other similar niche subsystems in order to add some flavor to certain missions as things progress. A quick disclaimer before we get started with the actual battle. I know this is primarily a painting channel, and I usually take painting standards pretty seriously. But this was a bit of an impromptu game, and I didn't have time to get the Empire forces ready. Episode 2 is going to have the same issue, but going forward, the quality of models and paint jobs is certain to improve. Sorry about this. I don't have a huge backlog of Old World models like I do with 40k, so I just got started with Old World. Sorry about this, guys, but I promise you it's going to get better from here on. Rumors swirl of renewed beastman activity from the Drakwald. Oswald Solner, a lone witch hunter, is able to loan a small contingent of state troops and road wardens from his home province of Ostland. Rather than head overland, a small ship takes the band from their home province to the wasteland, allowing them to re-enter the Empire from the west on the far side of the Drakwald. As they continue east to the village of Roche, the village elder says that the local men from the villages have gathered to the fields north of Eisenbüttel, under the command of Baron Helmer Hackenholt. The battle is surely over, but perhaps there is still some glory to be won in running down the remaining mutants back to their forest homes. Yet before the site of the battle can be reached, the marching column is brought to a halt. Screams echo from the village of Eisenbüttel. The troops are deployed on a series of hills overlooking the small village, hoping to use the vantage point to better assess the situation. It's there that they see small bands of wretched mutants emerge from the forest. Cries of terrified civilians can be heard from within the hovels. Their homes can only shelter them from the beast for so long. Both forces move to converge on their right flank. Yet, as the swordsmen march from their concealed position atop the hill, the clamor draws the attention of the Ungor. With their allies revealed, the Black Lanterns use the opportunity. Loosing bolts, they manage to fell one of the Ungor. The Ungor turn to face new rivals, readying spears before facing another barrage of bolts. As another one of their number is felled, the remaining beasts begin to panic. Even the Mark of Chaos Undivided is unable to help them, as they fall back in good order. Closer to the village, another pack of Ungor can be seen gathered around a burning log. They wreath their kindled arrows in flame. The Black Lanterns march around the cabin, hoping to have a clear path to engage the skirmishing archers. Meanwhile, the Red Bloods move to engage both groups of spearmen who have abandoned the civilians and march against the Imperials. The Red Bloods are charged by the Ungor, who are unable to deal any proper damage. The Red Bloods then hack down all but one of the Ungor in reprisal. However, the discipline is found to be lacking, instead opting to charge the fleeing Ungor. On the Empire's movement phase, they charge the fleeing Ungor. I made a small rules error here. The Ungor should have been able to make a flee reaction and get some extra movement. In the grand scheme, it didn't actually matter. The state troops managed to catch up and cut down the fleeing straggler, reforming to face the second unit. As the Empire maneuvers, they find the two groups of skirmishing Ungor using blazing arrows to try and set fire to the vulnerable buildings in the village. The Road Wardens charge one group of skirmishers. A few stand and fire, but the armor of the Wardens is able to repel the missiles. They charge and the Ungor rank up to face them. The two Imperial units engage lowly beastmen on opposite sides of the board. In their combat, the Black Lanterns are able to slay 3 of the Ungor. The Ungor Halfhorn issues a challenge, which is accepted by Oswald. The beast manages to inflict a single wound with his spear, before being shot apart by pistols in close range. With neither side being able to inflict additional casualties, the beastmen run as the Empire state troops move to reform and face down the archers. The 2 remaining beastmen who survive the onslaught from the Road Wardens fall back in good order. However, after the Road Wardens pursue, the next combat sees the champion dead, and the banner cut down in flight. On the beastmen's turn, the Ungor spearmen rally. They move towards the now exposed rear of the state troops. The troops ignore the threat posed by the spearmen and charge headlong into the archers. The combat is won decisively as the Ungor are cut down to the man. As the Road Wardens ready themselves to face down the last group of Ungor, the sounds of mustering can be heard. A large contingent of Empire archers, irregulars drawn from the local peasantry and villagers, arrive. However, their help is not needed, as when the Ungor charge the Road Wardens, sword and trampling hoof win the day, and the last of the beasts are slain. These new arrivals claim to be levies to the Baron's army. The battle to the north was a terrible defeat. Strange and powerful beasts of great numbers swarmed through the army of man. These humble villagers arrived to ensure their loved ones safe. Now, with new resistance mounting, they swear to aid the witch hunter in this campaign. The Black Lanterns, through their swiftness and skill at arms, proved themselves to be the most valuable members of the warband, and as such the glory goes to them. That's gonna be it for me, guys. Let me know what you thought of this, and if I should turn it into a proper series. Also, do you like the tighter, more narrated battle reports, or should I do something a little bit more conventional?